When you take a bite of your pizza, the last question on your mind is whether an animal was abused to get it made. But what if one of the ingredients was produced by mistreating animals? Now, disclaimer, the following images are graphic. And as you can see, that's what one undercover activist uncovered at a dairy farm in New Mexico, where he witnessed and videotaped workers whipping, kicking, and punching cows, among other things. And this farm happens to be a milk producer for Leprino Foods, which is the world's largest mozzarella cheese maker, which supplies cheese to restaurant chains like Pizza Hut and Papa John's. Now, the dairy farm in question has fired its employees and halted its milking operations, as well as referred its abusive workers to law enforcement for further review. But is treating this like an isolated incident enough? Or is animal cruelty an industry-wide problem? Joining us now to discuss are Matt Dominguez, Public Policy Manager at Farm Animal Protection, Melissa Cronin, a staff writer at The Dodo, Nathan Runkle, the president of Mercy for Animals, and Ted Genoways, the author of The Chain, Farm, Factor, and the Fate of Our Food. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And Nathan, let's begin with you. As your organization that was able to uncover this and put this video out there, tell us what you can about how you were able to obtain it.
Yeah, one of our investigators was hired at this factory farm in New Mexico and worked there for about a month. And every day he went to work wired with a pinhole-sized hidden camera and documented just a culture of cruelty at this factory farm. He documented workers taking chains and whipping cows in the face and body, causing bloody wounds, workers kicking cows, down cows. Those are cows that are too sick or injured to even stand or walk on their own, being lifted up and dragged and put into transport trucks with forklifts, all while being electrically shocked in the genitals by workers. This is abuse that happened day in and day out. And as you said, the facility has at least temporarily been shut down. We want that to be permanent. We want management and the workers to be criminally charged with animal cruelty. But we also want the dairy industry to implement meaningful animal welfare policies and oversight, including Leprino Foods, Papa John's, Pizza Hut. They really have to step up to the plate here to ensure that this egregious abuse does not continue within the dairy industry.
The video really is horrifying, and you had some animal welfare experts from Colorado State University review this footage, and they wrote, quote, "Of all the atrocity videos we have examined on behalf of various animal rights, animal advocacy groups, this one may well depict the most prolonged and severest pain being inflicted on innocent, non-ambulatory dairy cattle. It is clear that the workers enjoy this infliction of pain and suffering and even make remarks to that effect." You know, to that last part right there, Matt, you know, would you say that that's probably one of the scariest things here, is that these people seem to be enjoying it?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, on these factory farms, you're talking about roughly 9 billion animals that are living their lives in conditions that are filthy, and oftentimes with cruelty being inflicted upon them that would be illegal if it was our dogs and cats. And what's scary here in New Mexico is that just last year, legislators on behalf of the agribusiness tried to pass an ag-gag bill that would have made this investigation impossible had we not worked to defeat that bill that tried to be passed last year. And it's very scary what's happening on these factory farms, and it's work like Mercy for Animals and the Humane Society doing these investigations that are really exposing this abuse to the public. And the industry clearly has something to hide, because instead of cleaning up their bad behavior, they want to make these undercover investigations illegal.
And that's the thing, is they do try to act like this was an isolated incident, like this was a one-off, you know, and I think that's perhaps the scariest thing. But Ted, you know, would you expect the company to react any other way?
No, this is exactly how I'd expect the companies to react. I mean, the industry pattern, and the thing that I think is most troubling, is that I've seen that when companies are investigation, they become extremely active in trying to implement legislation in their states and where they do business that would protect them from further investigation. They're not trying to clean up. For the most part, what they're trying to do is to get regulation or get measures in place that would protect them in the future.
And, you know, Melissa, you actually tweeted and wrote about this, too, to this extent, saying this undercover expose of major dairy supplier would never have happened if ag-gag laws were in place in New Mexico. How, I guess you could say, how effective have ag-gag laws been in trying to keep this kind of stuff out of public view?
Well, you know, in the several states where ag-gag laws are already in place, I mean, it's a complete shutoff. It makes shooting on the grounds of a slaughterhouse or a factory farm illegal. It makes shooting sometimes from the sidewalk near the factory farm illegal. And really, there's the animal welfare problem, as everyone has said already. But there's other issues here. I mean, it's just clearly a violation of civil liberties. You can't just deny access to an industry that affects everyone. And especially we know these things are going on. You know, we know there's animal welfare problems. So cutting off journalists' access, cutting off investigators' access, I mean, you're not only just totally covering up abuse, but you're also not getting public access to information about food safety, about E. coli, about worker safety. If you can't expose animal abuses, you definitely can't expose worker abuses. So yeah, I mean, they're very effective, but hopefully there won't be that many states where they're in place. So.
Well, Ted, who would you say from the research that you've done are some of the worst offenders, if we can name names and companies and factories?
Well, most of my research has been looking at Hormel Foods, and they certainly have been one of the companies that has done the most in the Midwest in recent years to try to expand and catch up with some of the other pork producers that are larger producers. Hormel's been trying to gain market share, and a lot of what that means is investing more heavily in animal confinements and also then taking an active role in legislation to try to make sure that they are not being targeted for investigation. And so in 2008, when they were targeted by PETA for an investigation, and it had a significant impact on their bottom line, their head of legislative affairs took a strong hand in drafting the ag-gag legislation that was introduced in Minnesota, where Hormel is headquartered, and in Iowa, where the majority of their farms are. And it was an altered version of that legislation, but it was growing out of that bill that Iowa's ag-gag legislation came to be.
And Nathan, who else does your organization focus on?
Well, first of all, I want to point out that back in 2009, we did another undercover investigation at a different Leprino food supplier in New York. And that investigation documented workers cutting off the tails of cows without any pain relief, burning out their horns without any painkillers, workers hitting cows in the head with wrenches, and it resulted in animal cruelty prosecution. So Leprino has had this issue of animal cruelty in its supply chain on the table for at least 5 years, yet they have dragged their feet and they have done absolutely nothing to ensure that basic animal welfare standards are implemented and overseen. Now, just last month, Nestle, which is the largest dairy company in the entire country, implemented a set of global animal welfare policies, including that for dairy cows, after an investigation exposed horrible cruelty at one of their factory farms. So we're hoping that Leprino will step up to the plate here and use their purchasing power to really reform the dairy industry, because simply firing a few workers as a reactionary measure to an investigation is similar to throwing a Band-Aid into a war zone. It simply does not address the underlying issue of animal cruelty within the dairy industry. So we see that this cruelty is rampant in the dairy industry. It's inherent in factory farm systems that really have no meaningful oversight to prevent this abuse. There's no federal regulations that provide protection to animals during their lives on factory farms. And legislators in many of these agricultural states are spending their time working to prosecute whistleblowers versus protecting animals. And I think that that is the exact opposite of what the American public would like for them to be doing.
And why is that happening too, right? I mean, why is it that these companies are successful in getting this legislation pushed through? How close are the relationships that we see a lot of state legislators? How close are they to these companies? Are there direct ties that we can find when it comes to, let's say, things like campaign donations?
Absolutely, there are. In fact, in Iowa, for example, one of the first states to pass an ag-gag law, we saw direct campaign contributions to the governor, to elected officials that championed the ag-gag legislation there, companies that we investigated and exposed animal cruelty at their facilities. So money talks in politics, and it's these big factory farm interests that are oftentimes lining the pockets of these elected officials who are turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to the will of their constituents, who do not support ag-gag legislation, who want more transparency, not less, in food production.
And Melissa, what about the companies like the Papa John's and the Pizza Huts and the Domino's and whoever ends up getting their supply of, in this case, their mozzarella cheese, but I'm sure this can apply to a variety of different products. Do they bear some responsibility?
Yeah, of course. Of course you can't be knowing exactly what's going on in your dozens, hundreds of suppliers, but these companies are huge and they have a lot of resources and they have a lot of people. And really, it's your food at the end of the day, and you need to be knowing exactly where that comes from, and you need to be sending out inspectors, and you need to be, on these people to make sure what your product is like, standing up to your company's standards. Because you can't say, if I'm Domino's, I can't say I'm responsible, I'm treating my animals well, if clearly your supplier isn't. It's the same cheese, it's coming from the same place.
And what about just the quality of the product, Matt? Maybe I don't know enough about this, but if the animals are being treated better, I'm assuming then that they perhaps have a longer lifespan, right? That they can produce more dairy throughout that lifespan, that you want to be able to treat them well.
Well, Melissa brings up a good point about food safety, and that's what we're really concerned here, along with the animal welfare implications, is that in 2008, the HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States, we did an investigation at the Hallmark slaughter plant that led to the largest meat recall in U.S. history. This was food that was destined for the school lunch, the federal school lunch program. And the industry's response has been to push ag-gag bills to make sure these investigations don't come to light in the first place. And so there are serious food safety concerns, along with workers' rights issues, environmental issues, but of course the animal welfare concerns.
I've got another tweet here. This one's from Michael Roberts, and it says, ag-gag laws often incur higher legal penalties for investigating animal cruelty than the cruelty itself. How messed up is that? It's messed up. That's all I can say there. But Nathan, what does it say about our priorities as a society?
Well, again, I think that the legislators who are pushing ag-gag are doing this because of corporate interests and not the will of their constituents. We see poll after poll showing that people in agricultural states do not support ag-gag. It is messed up. Whistleblowers and investigators are heroes. They should be rewarded for coming forward and exposing this cruelty, not be slapped with penalties or fines, or in some cases, the risk of going to jail simply for speaking out against illegal animal abuse or food safety violations. These are people who should be really rewarded for bringing these injustices to light. The only way that our society can start to address issues of animal cruelty and food safety issues is if we can have an open and honest discussion about it. And that's exactly what the agriculture industry, these factory farm lobbyists, want to stop. They want to have a one-sided discussion where they can roll out staged images of animals in a clean, healthy environment. They don't want the real images that are taken with hidden cameras when factory farmers don't think that they're being watched to be aired for the public to see, because it's gruesome, it's ugly, and the only rational conclusion is that change has to happen after you see that.
Well, the industry is also good at painting those who are activists, animal rights activists, as nefarious and kind of as the enemy. And I've got a piece up here from Will Potter's blog too, from Green is the New Red, that said the beef industry compares the Humane Society to ISIS. It almost seems like there is no length that they will not go to try to paint animal rights activists in a negative light. Matt, what's your response as someone who is from the Humane Society to being compared to the Islamic State?
It's absolutely unbelievable. And in the Idaho fight, which unfortunately was one of the states in the last 2 years, the only state in the last 2 years to pass one of these bills after Mercy for Animals did an investigation that showed not only physical abuse, but also sexual abuse of dairy cows. We were called terrorists in that state as well. And I think it's incredibly disgraceful to compare those investigators and folks who are working to protect animals to the same folks that fly planes into buildings. It's dishonest, it's horrible, but it really goes to show the integrity of this industry. These investigations show rampant abuse. We want it to stop, and of course, they want to cover it up.
I hate to go back to this point, but did you say sexual abuse of animals?
That is correct. Nathan, if you would like to talk a little bit more about the investigation you did at Betancourt facilities, but yes, it was deplorable.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not uncommon. We find just a complete lack of respect for these animals that are treated as real machines in a production system. But at this specific facility, workers were fondling the genitals of animals, making crude sexual remarks. And again, this is the type of cruelty and exploitation of these animals that the dairy industry like to keep hidden from public view. They don't want people to see this. They don't want people to talk about it. And that's all the more reason why we should have transparency in food production.
So Ted, what is it that you've learned from the way that things have been playing out in Iowa that perhaps the rest of the country can now look at as lessons in how to defeat ag-gag laws and the way that these companies are able to maneuver and work through the political system to really get their way?
Well, probably the first thing that I've seen that I think everyone should be aware of and be concerned about is that now that there is a law in Iowa that allows employers to ask if people are affiliated with organizations like Mercy for Animals or PETA or HSUS on job applications, that is now grounds for denying employment. And to my mind, that's something that is sort of blatantly unconstitutional and that needs to be challenged in the courts. But while it exists, it has had a tremendous chilling effect on the ability of these sorts of groups to work especially inside of confinement facilities, which by their very nature are concealed. When you drive by a confinement barn, all you see is a white building that looks clean, well ventilated from the outside. You don't have any idea what's going on the inside. And the only way for the public to know, if the industry is not willing to show us, is for these sorts of organizations to be able to do their investigations. And to my mind, it is the real point of caution for everyone to be concerned about is some of the First Amendment issues that Melissa raised. I mean, this is it goes beyond just the concerns for animal welfare. It has to do with immigration policy. It affects environmental policy. Anything that these companies may be doing that they don't want the public to know about, these bills are a major step forward in their ability to conceal that.
Now, Melissa, there was a landmark ruling in Oregon this year, too, that said that animals can legally be considered victims like humans. Do you think that that's something that we could see catching on and being applied in other states?
You know, I mean, it's something we think about a lot and we sort of hope for, but these lobbies and these people that are in agribusiness, I mean, they're powerful. And that's a big protection to afford an animal, to treat them like a victim. And, you know, it seems like, of course they could be a victim. That seems natural, but really farm animals aren't treated that way. And some aren't even afforded the same protections that, you know, a pet would be afforded. So, I mean, that's sort of a hope, but that would be a big step forward. And really, right now, what we're looking at is such a hurdle to even get, you know, footage of them, to even get inside some of these farms. So that would be the next step after sort of getting around some of these ag-gag bills, because without even access to the information or any sort of transparency, I mean, there's no way to know. You can't know whether a farm is good or bad. So.
Now, it was announced today that the FBI is going to start tracking animal cruelty cases. How big of a deal is that?
That's huge. I mean, that's great. You know, getting these big sort of government bodies involved is huge. I mean, they can do a lot of things that, you know, undercover investigators, while they can get in on the ground floor, sometimes they don't have access, they don't have resources, and they're really working on the strength of these small teams of people. But getting the FBI in on things like this, and also, I mean, just sort of the psyche is changing, and you can see it in things like this. You can see it in these moves towards personhood, where animals are being treated as persons, as legal persons or victims. You know, you can see this sort of shift in the way that we're thinking about animals and thinking about how to treat them not as sort of our machines, or even not as just our playthings. Really thinking about, you know, what are they experiencing and how can we, you know, treat them as sentient beings, not just objects.
And, you know, I have to bring this up because I've been doing so much climate change coverage the last couple of days, and because we're seeing a huge rally here called the People's Climate March this weekend in New York, and because next week the UN is going to be hosting a week-long climate summit. You know, these are, even your food goes back to that issue as well, and you have to think about what it is that our meat consumption and our reliance on meat consumption is doing to the environment, and not only what it is doing to the animals, but also to the environment. And I think that, you know, it's another thing that could get people maybe to rethink the way that we approach some of this. Now, Nathan, when you hear that the FBI is going to start investigating animal cruelty cases, do you trust them? Do you feel like this is going to take some of the pressure off of your organization to have people really take risks because of these ag-gag laws to get in there and get these videos out?
It's certainly good news that the FBI is starting to track this. I think it's long overdue. The problem is that these animal cruelty convictions are all really complaint driven. And inside a factory farm, so many of the workers are undocumented that they are afraid to come forward and speak out against cruelty that they witness. And so much of the cruelty that we document is really built into the factory farm system, where these animals are treated as milk-producing machines. They never go out into pasture. They live on concrete, manure-soaked flooring. They are hooked up to electric machines. And workers who become tired and frustrated by these animals, if they're not moving fast enough or if they fall, they start to beat the animals and kick the animals and shock them. So that's why we need to really overhaul this system. We need federal legislation that oversees the way in which animals on these farms are being treated. We need inspections of these facilities, but we also need Leprino Foods, we need Domino's, Pizza Hut, these major corporations to step up to the plate right now and say that animal abuse will not be tolerated. They should be installing cameras that are live streamed to the internet to remove the curtains of secrecy so that there is transparency. They should be ending painful mutilations of these animals without painkillers. They should be providing care to downed animals. These animals should have access to pasture. These are things that are already happening in Europe and a lot of facilities, but the United States is lagging far behind. So we need some of the big players to step in and treat this issue with the seriousness that it deserves, and not pretend that this is just an issue of a few bad apples. The whole barrel needs to be reevaluated and needs to be addressed.
And Matt, finally, what about the power of the consumer?
The consumer has a lot of power. These industries don't exist unless they're given money by the consumers that buy their products. And so I ask everyone who's watching, everyone I talk to, these abuses that are being exposed by Mercy for Animals and the Humane Society of the United States and other wonderful animal protection groups, is this something that you would be willing to turn your hard-earned money over to allow this to happen in your name? And I would argue most people, vast majority of people, would not be okay with that. And so when you go into the store, make sure that you're voting with your dollar, not voting for cruelty.
All right, I have to leave it there. But Matt, Melissa, Nathan, and Ted, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, stick around. There's much more coming up on HuffPost Live.